The way she looked at my mouth was a thing I couldn't name at first. I was halfway through stirring my coffee, one hand tracing the chipped ceramic mug, when she glanced up from the counter. Not a look like hello or smile, more like she was measuring something she didn't quite understand either. My fingers froze mid-stir. The foam wobbled, a little mountain of beige cream, and I realized I hadn't breathed in a few seconds. She came here most mornings, or maybe it just felt that way. I never knew her name, never heard her order, but she had a rhythm. The way she pushed her hair behind her ear, the subtle nods when the barista handed her cappuccino, the little pause before she sipped. It was precise, but not in a showy way, more like she had somewhere else inside her head and didn't bother hiding it. I watched her, quietly. My coffee grew cold. I thought about texting someone, anyone, but the fingers paused over the screen. I didn't know why I wanted to, and part of me liked that I didn't. She didn't belong in my life, not really, but I noticed things anyway. The crease at the corner of her mouth when she smiled, the tilt of her head when she laughed softly at something I couldn't hear. When she caught me looking, I panicked for half a second, then just looked down at the napkin I was folding. My hands were slow, careful, folding and unfolding, folding again. I wanted to look up again, but my chest kept the rhythm for me. "Hey," she said, suddenly, like she had noticed me noticing her. Her voice was soft, not really loud enough to startle, just enough to pull me out of the quiet bubble I was in. "You always come here at this hour?" I shrugged. "Mostly." My throat was dry. Too dry. I didn't even think of asking her name. Something told me it wasn't the right moment. "Coffee's better than whatever I'm used to," she said, lifting her cup just slightly, as if offering it across the space between us. I noticed how her fingers curved around the handle. How her thumb moved along the rim, almost brushing the foam. I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do. And somehow, that was enough. We didn't speak for a moment. I could hear the espresso machine whine, the bell above the door jingle, a man coughing in the back. Everything normal, ordinary, but my stomach had caught a rhythm of its own. When she finally left, I found my eyes lingering on the doorway long after she was gone. Her coat swung lightly behind her, the click of her heels folding into memory. I thought about texting someone, anyone, again, but the phone stayed face down. And then my screen buzzed. I didn't recognize the number. A message. Just 3 words. "Can I join?" I blinked. My hands paused. My coffee sat untouched. And I realized I hadn't been thinking about coffee at all, that I didn't text back right away. I just stared at the message, "Can I join?" My thumb hovered over the screen, then pulled back. Part of me wanted to delete it. Part of me wanted to leave the coffee shop right now and never return. I sent a simple, "Sure." When she returned, I noticed the faint scent of rain on her coat. She carried a thermos, like she'd brought something from home. She poured into our shared mugs, careful not to spill. I felt my hands tremble slightly, but tried to pretend I was rearranging sugar packets. "You always drink it this bitter?" she asked, watching me stir. Her gaze lingered, patient, waiting for a reaction that I didn't know how to give. I like it simple," I said. My words felt small. She nodded, like she understood without really needing me to explain. We talked in fragments, pieces of conversation flitting across the table. She mentioned a friend's wedding she'd gone to last weekend, a laugh that had nothing to do with me but somehow drew me closer. I admitted, reluctantly, that I hadn't left my apartment in 2 days except for this. She didn't comment, didn't judge. She just lifted her mug slightly in acknowledgement. There was a pause then, the kind that doesn't feel empty. I found myself imagining the silence stretching across months, years even, the way she might move through ordinary days and somehow include me in them. Dangerous thoughts, I realized. Dangerous because I didn't know where they would lead. Because she had her own life, married once, divorced, the kind of life I wasn't sure I belonged in. "You always sit like that?" she asked, nodding toward the edge of the table where I leaned too far forward, hands folded around the mug, shoulders tense. Like you're waiting for something, she said, but it wasn't a tease. More like a quiet observation, soft as the rain tapping against the window. I shrugged. Maybe I am. She didn't press further. Instead, she reached across the table and brushed a crumb off my sleeve. The gesture was casual, almost insignificant. Yet something in the movement made my chest tighten, made me want to memorize the exact angle of her wrist, the curve of her fingers, the way her nails caught the light. I looked at her then, really looked, noticing the small lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her lips moved when she spoke without realizing it. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, I thought later, replaying it over and over, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. She smiled lightly, sipping her tea, and I realized the dangerous, quiet truth: this connection was mine to treasure and mine to fear. But I didn't want to look away. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't either. The next morning, I hesitated before leaving my apartment. Coffee in hand, I kept thinking about yesterday, the way she brushed that crumb off my sleeve, the faint warmth that lingered on my arm long after. I told myself it was nothing. Ordinary. But my fingers twitched as if they knew better. She was already at the corner table when I walked in, notebook open, pen poised. The barista nodded at me. I waved. She looked up, smiled faintly, and I noticed a line of worry at her brow I hadn't seen before. Something was off. "Hey," I said, lowering my voice. "Hey," she replied, but her eyes flicked to the door behind me. A kid, maybe 19, maybe 20, slouched into the shop, backpack slung carelessly. She stiffened for just a second, then relaxed. I caught it, just a flicker. A subtle pause before she returned to her notebook. I stirred my coffee without thinking, spoon clinking against the ceramic. My chest felt tight. Part of me wanted to ask, "Is that?" But I didn't. She didn't offer any explanation. We sat in silence for a while, just the two of us, just the drip of espresso machines and the scratch of pen on paper. I noticed her hand move over the page, slow, deliberate, and something in me tensed. I imagined her tracing my name instead. Ridiculous. Impossible. "Did you get that report done?" I asked, the words clumsy. "Yeah," she said, voice clipped. She hesitated, then added, "Almost." I nodded, though I didn't know why. My throat was dry. My hand hovered near hers, but I didn't move. Not yet. A pause. She glanced at me, corners of her mouth twitching, but her gaze flicked away before I could read it. I leaned slightly forward, just enough to feel the air between us tighten. She shifted back, subtly, and I froze mid-movement. Too close, not close enough. "Did you want the sugar?" I asked finally, hoping it sounded casual. No," she said, a beat too quickly. She smiled faintly, fingers brushing the mug as if to reclaim it. My heart slammed in that quiet, ordinary moment. We sat like that, closer than yesterday, but with a small wall built of hesitation, of unspoken rules. Every glance, every shift of weight, carried an invisible question. When she finally stood, I realized my hand had twitched toward her arm, almost touching, but I pulled back just in time. She caught me looking, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to the thin space between us. Then she turned, walked toward the door, and I wanted to call her name, but my mouth stayed shut. I watched her go. And somewhere inside me, I knew we'd both felt it, the brush of possibility. Not a kiss. Not a confession. Just the near miss that made the pause afterward stretch forever. We ended up on the bench outside the shop. Rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and smelling faintly of wet concrete and coffee. She tucked her bag on her lap, fingers brushing the strap as if to anchor herself. I kept my hands folded, watching her more than the street, noticing the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, the faint crease near her mouth when she exhaled. "I ran into someone today," she said, voice low, hesitant. She didn't meet my eyes. "Oh?" I asked. My stomach turned over, even though I didn't know why. An old friend. He asked about me. She laughed softly, but it was thin, brittle. And about everything. Family. Work. Life. You know. I nodded. I did. I knew exactly how she didn't want to talk about the details, and yet the tension in her voice carved itself into the space between us. I felt a tug, something like jealousy, but more complicated. Not for me, not really. For me. I wanted to exist in that space she guarded so carefully. You okay? I asked, careful. My words sounded fragile even to me. She nodded, sort of. Yeah. I mean, yes. Mostly. We sat in silence, letting the damp air do the work. I felt a pull, a tightness in my chest. I wanted to reach for her hand, just to see if she'd let me. Just a test. Her eyes flicked to mine, and I swear she saw what I almost did, what I almost wanted to say. My mouth opened. Words hovered, unfinished. I imagined whispering something reckless. Something that would change everything. I started, then stopped. The air thickened with the weight of unsaid things. She shifted slightly closer, brushing against my arm without seeming to. I felt my pulse in the fingertips I'd buried in my lap. I don't know if I should tell you, she murmured, almost to herself, almost lost in the drizzle reflecting street. Her gaze stayed on the wet asphalt. But I sometimes think about what it would mean, if I weren't so careful. I swallowed, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. Everything I wanted to say felt too heavy, too reckless. And yet, the bench, the rain, the quiet folding of her fingers, somehow it felt like permission to speak, just slightly. But I didn't. Not yet. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, letting her words hang between us like mist over the pavement. And then she looked at me, really looked, and I knew she wanted to ask something, or maybe she was asking me without words. Something dangerous. Something irreversible. I wanted to meet it. I wanted to step closer, speak the unspeakable. But the words froze. The moment paused. And all I could do was wonder, could we survive if we crossed that line? I went to the coffee shop the next morning, expecting to see her at the corner table. I didn't. The barista nodded at me, familiar, but her seat was empty. I stared at the spot for longer than I should have, tracing the outline of the chair with my eyes. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. Just a quiet pause, like someone had hit stop mid-scene. I ordered my usual, stirred the coffee absent-mindedly, and waited. Not for her, I didn't know what I was waiting for, but for a sense of normal, for a reason. The door jingled every few minutes, strangers coming and going, but she didn't. When my phone buzzed, I nearly dropped it. A message from an unknown number. I'm sorry. Can't meet today. No explanation. No hint of why. I read it twice. Thrice. My thumb hovered, almost replying, almost asking, but I didn't. Something about it felt like a warning I wasn't ready to hear. I replayed our last conversation, her near confession, the way she brushed against my arm. Had it meant something? Did she feel it the way I did? Or was I imagining it all along? I remembered the faint worry in her eyes when someone had come into the shop the day before. Maybe it wasn't me she was protecting. Maybe it was something else, someone else. A past she hadn't shared. I tried to work around it, busying myself with my laptop, stirring my coffee so much that the spoon rattled against the mug. The chair across from me remained empty. I imagined her walking through the door, laughing softly, apologizing for the delay. I imagined it again. And again. Then I thought about the message I hadn't sent. The one that would have read, "Do you want me to wait?" I didn't type it. Not yet. Not now. Hours passed. The shop emptied. My coffee went cold. I folded the napkin over and over, tracing the creases, a small, useless ritual to keep my hands busy while my chest tightened. I realized something else, slowly, painfully. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The story was waiting somewhere beyond the door, but I wasn't allowed to read the next line yet. I left without knocking, without calling, without knowing if she'd ever return today. The door jingled behind me, the world moving, indifferent. The seat remained empty, a small monument to questions I couldn't ask and feelings I couldn't own. And somehow, that empty chair felt heavier than any confession that I found her at the small park near the river, sitting on the same bench where we had nearly crossed the line last week. Her coat was damp from the drizzle, hair falling loose over one shoulder. I hesitated at the edge of the path, watching her trace patterns in the wet leaves with her fingertips. She looked up when I cleared my throat. For a second, we just held each other's gaze, the words caught somewhere between wanting and fear. "I didn't mean to vanish," she said softly, almost apologetically. Her hands folded in her lap, knuckles pale. I wondered," I admitted, voice low. I paused. The words felt fragile in the open air. If something happened. Or if it was me. Or if, I trailed off. She nodded slowly. "It wasn't you." Her eyes didn't leave mine. "Not exactly." We sat in silence for a while. I noticed the way her shoulders relaxed when she didn't have to explain, the small exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I wanted to reach for her hand, but my fingers stayed in my own lap, hovering just short of her warmth. "I shouldn't," she began, then stopped. Her voice wavered, the pause loaded with unspoken truths. "I'm not easy. Not like this." "I know," I said, and it wasn't a reassurance. Just a fact I could live with. My chest ached in a way I didn't expect. "But I don't mind." Her gaze softened, a quiet, careful light. "You shouldn't, but maybe you do anyway." The wind shifted, brushing her hair against her cheek. I finally let my hand move, brushing a stray strand away. My fingers lingered at the edge of her shoulder, nothing more. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Just a subtle tilt of her head, and I felt the weight of our hesitation shift, like a page turning quietly. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Of messing things up. Of feeling more than I should." "I was too," I admitted. My voice cracked slightly. "But I don't want to hide it anymore." She smiled, small, almost fragile, but it reached her eyes. A tiny, honest curve of lips that felt like permission. I didn't lean in. Didn't speak anything more than necessary. But the bench, the rain-slick leaves, the cold air, they all seemed warmer, somehow, because we'd finally said the unsayable without saying too much. She touched my hand lightly, just at the edge, letting it rest there. No words. No promises. No grand declarations. Just the quiet acknowledgement that we existed in the same small world, at the same fragile moment. "Okay," she said softly, almost to herself. I nodded. "Okay." And that was enough. Weeks passed. Not in leaps or bursts, but in the quiet, deliberate rhythm of ordinary mornings. The corner table at the coffee shop became ours again, though we never claimed it. I arrived first most days, black coffee in hand, stirring slowly as I watched the world unfold outside the window. She would appear at 8:47 a.m., exactly, coat damp from the morning air, thermos tucked under her arm. No dramatics. No fanfare. Just the way she was. Some mornings, we didn't speak. We just existed together, the subtle warmth of presence enough. I'd noticed the small things, how she wrapped her fingers around the cup, the slight tilt of her head as she traced the foam's swirl, the soft exhale when she finally relaxed into the day. I liked that she noticed me noticing, even when we said nothing at all. Other mornings, words found us in fragments. Stories about her work, a stray memory from decades ago, a joke that fell flat but made us both laugh anyway. I told her about my own small routines, unsent texts I'd finally deleted, the odd way I folded napkins like bookmarks. Each confession felt like an offering, quiet and uneven, but she received it without judgment. We still walked past the benches by the river, the ones where the rain had nearly caught us off guard. Sometimes we stopped, sometimes we didn't. The air smelled of wet concrete, leaves, and coffee, the scents stitched into memory. Our hands brushed casually, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, and we didn't need more than that. There were moments of stillness that carried more weight than any conversation. A shared tea in the park. A pause on a doorstep. Black coffee sipped in silence, both of us aware that the day had started and nothing else mattered right then. These tiny rhythms became ours, a quiet intimacy built on patience, observation, and the gentle unraveling of fear. I thought often about how far we'd come from the first glance, the unsent messages, the near confessions. No grand gestures. No confessions shouted over rain or music. Just a slow, deliberate weaving of lives that had once been strangers, then fragile acquaintances, then quiet companions in the small hours. One morning, as she stirred her tea, I noticed the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, a detail I'd catalogued long ago, and she caught me looking. She smiled softly, a small, private acknowledgement. I returned it, fingertips brushing her hand as if to say, "We've survived the silence. We've survived the pause. We've survived us." And that was enough. The world continued outside the window. Customers came and went. The clock ticked toward 9 a.m. Life carried on. But here, in the quiet, imperfect fold of mornings and coffee and pauses, we existed fully, slowly, together. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?